The first message arrived on a Tuesday morning at 0347 hours Greenwich Mean Time, intercepted by the Arecibo Observatory's replacement facility in Puerto Rico. Dr. Sarah Chen had been monitoring the deep space arrays for 3 years without so much as a blip of extraterrestrial activity. When the signal came through, she almost dismissed it as interference from a passing satellite. But the pattern was too regular, too deliberate. The mathematical sequences embedded within the radio waves spoke of intelligence, an intelligence that understood prime numbers, geometric progressions, and most importantly, the universal constant of pi calculated to 47 decimal places. Jesus Christ, Sarah whispered, her coffee mug slipping from trembling fingers to shatter on the concrete floor. She'd spent her entire career hoping for this moment, and now that it was here, she felt nothing but cold terror. The message took 6 hours to fully decode with the help of the world's most advanced quantum computers. When the translation finally appeared on her screen, Sarah's blood ran cold. People of Earth. We are the Cathmori of the Andromeda Galaxy. We have observed your species for 847 of your years. We come to you in desperate need. Our worlds are dying. Our children are dying. An ancient evil stirs in the void between galaxies, something that devours worlds and leaves only darkness. We have fought for millennia, but we are losing. We have seen your wars, your weapons, your capacity for violence. We do not ask lightly, but we need your help. Will you answer our call? Within 12 hours, every major world leader sat in an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy as translators worked frantically to ensure every delegate understood the gravity of the situation. President Marcus Webb of the United States leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face etched with concern. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying the weight of history, we stand at a crossroads that no human generation has ever faced. We've been asked to join an interstellar war. The Russian delegate, Dmitry Volkov, scoffed. How do we know this isn't some elaborate hoax? What do you Americans call it, false flag operation? Secretary General Amara Okafor raised her hand for silence. Our scientists have verified the signal's origin. It came from outside our solar system, from a trajectory consistent with the Andromeda Galaxy. The mathematical proofs embedded in the message demonstrate knowledge far beyond current human capabilities. The debate raged for hours. Some delegates argued for caution, others for complete isolation. But it was General Patricia Morrison, the Pentagon's chief strategic advisor, who cut through the noise with brutal honesty. We're talking about beings who've been watching us for over 8 centuries, she said, her voice steady and cold. They've seen our wars, our weapons, our capacity for violence, as they put it. They're not asking for our technology or our resources. They're asking for what we do best, kill things efficiently. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. 3 days later, the second message arrived. This time, it came with coordinates and a timeline. The Cathmori would send a ship to Earth within 1 standard year. They would share their technology, their knowledge, and their desperation. In return, humanity would send its best warriors and most deadly weapons to fight an enemy that had been consuming civilizations for millions of years. The response was swift and unanimous. Earth would answer the call. Admiral Jackson Ironside Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. At 62, he was a veteran of 3 major conflicts and had earned his nickname after surviving a direct hit from a fusion torpedo that had vaporized half his ship's hull. The cybernetic implants along his left temple glowed softly in the bridge's dim lighting, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to death. Status report, he commanded, his voice cutting through the bridge's ambient noise. All systems green, Admiral, replied Commander Lisa Park, his first officer. The fleet is maintaining formation at 0.7 light speed. ETA to rendezvous point is 18 hours. Hayes nodded grimly. The fleet behind him represented the most destructive force humanity had ever assembled. 57 ships of various classes, each packed with enough firepower to level a small moon. The Retribution herself was a masterpiece of human engineering, a kilometer-long dreadnought armed with plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, and the crown jewel, a quantum disruptor capable of tearing holes in spacetime itself. But it wasn't just the ships that made this armada deadly. It was the people inside them. The crew of the Retribution represented the best of humanity's military forces. Marines who had survived the brutal fighting on Titan's methane storms. Pilots who had logged thousands of hours in the asteroid belt's zero-gravity combat zones. Engineers who could jury-rig weapons systems from spare parts and determination. And then there were the volunteers. Hayes turned to study the tactical display showing the fleet's composition. Mixed in with the military vessels were converted civilian ships, cargo haulers transformed into missile platforms, mining vessels equipped with directed energy weapons, even a few luxury yachts that had been turned into fast attack craft. When the call had gone out for volunteers, the response had been overwhelming. Farmers, teachers, factory workers, students, all willing to leave behind everything they knew to fight an enemy they'd never seen for people they'd never met. The recruitment centers had been flooded with applications from individuals who had no military training but possessed something equally valuable: the human capacity for righteous anger. Incoming transmission from the Kethmori vessel, reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. They're requesting permission to come aboard. Hayes straightened his uniform. Grant them docking clearance. And Lieutenant? He paused, meeting the young officer's eyes. Full honor guard. Whatever their problems with this ancient evil, they're about to get a very thorough education in why you don't mess with humanity. The Kethmori delegation that boarded the Retribution was unlike anything the human crew had expected. They were tall, nearly 8 feet in height, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shift between deep blue and silver depending on the light. Their eyes were large and multifaceted, like those of insects, but held an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. Their leader introduced herself as Zarathul, Supreme Commander of the Kethmori Defense Forces. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the listener's bones. Admiral Hayes, she said, her translated words carrying undertones of both hope and desperation. We cannot adequately express our gratitude for your people's willingness to help us in our darkest hour. Hayes studied the alien commander carefully. Despite their otherworldly appearance, he could read the exhaustion in her posture, the weight of countless defeats in her strange eyes. Commander Zarathul, we're honored to fight alongside you. But I need to know exactly what we're up against. Zarathul gestured to one of her subordinates, who activated a holographic display in the center of the briefing room. The image that appeared made several of the human officers take involuntary steps backward. The creature, if it could be called that, defied easy description. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Tendrils of pure darkness writhed around its form, and where they touched the holographic representation of space itself, reality seemed to bend and warp. This is a void spawn, Zarathul explained, her voice heavy with millennia of fear. They are not from our universe. They come from the spaces between realities, feeding on the life force of entire worlds. We call their leader the Devourer of Stars. General Morrison, who had been part of the diplomatic mission, leaned forward. How many worlds have they consumed? In our galaxy alone? 12,000 inhabited systems. Trillions of souls. Zarathul's form seemed to shimmer with grief. They consume everything, not just the physical matter, but the very essence of life itself. Worlds they touch become empty. Not dead, but empty. As if life had never existed there at all. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a war, it was a fight for the very concept of existence itself. What have you tried? Hayes asked quietly. Zarathul's laugh was bitter. Everything. We've thrown fleets numbering in the thousands at them. We've developed weapons that can crack planets in half. We've even attempted to flee to other galaxies, but they follow. They always follow. And yet you think we can help? Commander Park asked skeptically. Because, Zarathul replied, turning her multifaceted gaze on the human officers, in all our centuries of observation, we have never seen a species that approaches warfare with such creativity. Your people don't just fight to win, you fight to ensure your enemy can never threaten you again. You understand the concept of total war in ways that we, even in our desperation, struggle to comprehend.
Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. The alien was right.
Humanity's history was written in blood and fire, and while they'd grown beyond their most destructive impulses, they'd never forgotten the lessons learned in the crucible of endless conflict.
"Show me everything," Hayes said finally.
"Every battle, every weapon, every strategy you've tried. If we're going to do this, we need to understand not just what you're fighting, but how you've been fighting it."
The next several hours were a masterclass in futility.
The Kethmori had approached the war with the Void Spawn like a chess match, calculating, precise, predictable. They'd built massive defensive fortifications, developed increasingly powerful weapons, and fought with the honor and restraint that came from millions of years of civilization.
And they'd lost. Repeatedly. Catastrophically.
"You're fighting them like they're another species," Hayes observed after reviewing the tactical data.
"Like they follow the same rules of warfare that you do." "Do they not?" Zarathal asked, confusion evident in her harmonics.
"No," Hayes replied grimly. "They're parasites. And parasites don't follow rules, they exploit weaknesses." He turned to his staff. "Get me a full tactical analysis of every engagement. I want to know how these things move, how they attack, how they defend. And I want to know their feeding patterns." As the human officers worked through the night, a different picture began to emerge. The Void Spawn weren't just random destroyers, they were methodical. They targeted heavily populated worlds first, then moved on to resource-rich systems. They always left escape routes open, allowing survivors to flee to other worlds, where they would inevitably be followed.
"They're not just consuming worlds," Dr. Chin observed during one of the analysis sessions.
"They're driving entire populations ahead of them like cattle.
The refugees concentrate on remaining worlds, making them more efficient targets." Hayes nodded slowly. "And every time the Kethmori respond to defend these refugee worlds, they're fighting on the enemy's terms, in locations the Void Spawn have chosen."
He looked up at Zarathal.
"You've been playing their game for millennia. It's time to change the rules." The plan that emerged over the next week was audacious even by human standards.
Instead of defending against the Void Spawn's next attack, they would hunt them.
Track them back to their source and strike at the heart of their operation. "It's suicide," Zarathal protested when Hayes outlined the strategy.
"No one has ever successfully located the Devourer of Stars. It exists in the void between galaxies, in spaces where reality itself becomes fluid." "Then we'll make our own reality," Hayes replied with a savage grin. "Commander Park, begin implementation of Project World Killer. Dr. Chen, I need you to work with the Kethmori scientists on adapting our quantum disruptors for extreme conditions."
"And General Morrison?"
He turned to the aging soldier. "I need you to select our most expendable volunteers. The ones who understood this was a one-way trip when they signed up."
The preparations took 3 months.
The human fleet had swollen to nearly 200 ships as more volunteers arrived from Earth. But more importantly, every vessel had been modified with technology that married human innovation with Kethmori knowledge.
The result was terrifying.
The Retribution's quantum disruptors had been upgraded with Kethmori reality stabilization matrices, allowing them to function in the twisted space between galaxies. Human antimatter weapons had been augmented with exotic matter that could wound beings that existed partially outside normal spacetime.
But the crown jewel of human ingenuity was the Prometheus Array, a collection of modified stellar generators that could create artificial stars and then overload them in controlled supernovas.
It was a weapon that could crack reality itself, creating wounds in the fabric of existence that would take millennia to heal.
"You realize," Zarathal said as she watched the final preparations, "that if you succeed, the collateral damage could affect multiple galaxies. The spacetime distortions alone could render entire regions uninhabitable." Hayes nodded grimly. "Better a wounded universe than a dead one." "And if we're wrong?"
He shrugged.
"At least we'll go down fighting." The journey to the void between galaxies took 6 months at maximum sustainable velocity.
As they traveled farther from normal space, reality began to behave strangely. Instruments gave contradictory readings. Time moved differently in various parts of the ship. Some crew members reported seeing corridors that led nowhere, or rooms that were bigger on the inside than the outside.
But the humans adapted. They always did.
When they finally reached the coordinates where the Kethmori sensors indicated the devourer of stars waited, what they found defied every expectation.
It wasn't a creature. It wasn't even a single entity.
The devourer of stars was a wound in reality itself, a tear in the fabric of existence that leaked hungry darkness into the universe. Around it, feeding on the energy that poured through the gap, were the void spawn. Hundreds of them, each the size of a small moon, their dark forms writhing in the non-space between realities.
"Dear God," whispered Dr. Chen. "It's not invading our universe. It's digesting it."
That was when Hayes understood the true scope of the threat.
The void spawn weren't from another dimension, they were antibodies.
The universe itself was infected, and these creatures were the infection's response to the foreign influence of life and consciousness.
"All ships, this is Admiral Hayes," he announced over the fleet communication system. "We are about to engage in the final battle for the very concept of existence. Today, we teach the universe that life doesn't go quietly into the dark."
The battle that followed would later be called the most destructive conflict in the history of sentient life. The human fleet, supported by the remaining Kethmori vessels, launched everything they had at the void spawn.
Antimatter torpedoes created brief stars in the darkness.
Plasma cannons carved burning lines through creatures that existed partially outside normal space. The quantum disruptors tore holes in reality itself, creating pockets of normal spacetime where the void spawn could be damaged by conventional weapons.
But for every void spawn destroyed, two more seemed to emerge from the wound in reality.
The creatures that had terrorized the Kethmori for millennia were revealed to be nothing more than scouts. The true horror was the endless stream of hungry darkness that poured through the gap between worlds. "Admiral," Commander Park reported, her voice tight with strain, "we're losing ships faster than we can replace them. The Prometheus array is charging, but it needs another 30 minutes to reach full power." Hayes watched as another human destroyer was engulfed by writhing tentacles of darkness and simply ceased. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from existence so completely that the space it had occupied forgot it had ever been there.
"All remaining ships, implement the Thermopylae Protocol," Hayes ordered.
"We hold this position at all costs. No retreat, no surrender, no quarter given or asked." The Thermopylae Protocol was humanity's most desperate tactic, a fighting withdrawal designed to buy time at the cost of everything. Ships would ram the void spawn directly, overloading their reactors to create massive explosions. Crews would board the enemy creatures with nothing but magnetic boots and shaped charges, detonating nuclear warheads from within.
It was glorious. It was horrific. It was utterly, completely human.
The tide of battle began to turn when Captain Rodriguez of the converted cargo hauler Santiago made a desperate decision. Her ship was dying, her crew was dead, and she was facing 3 void spawn alone. Instead of trying to fight them, she did something that no Kethmori commander would have considered. She rammed her ship directly into the wound in reality.
The explosion that followed was visible from 3 galaxies away. The Santiago's overloaded reactor, augmented with experimental quantum disruptors, created a cascade failure in the wound itself. For a brief moment, the gap between realities began to close.
The void spawn, suddenly cut off from their source, became vulnerable. The human fleet, reduced to barely 30 ships, pressed their advantage with savage efficiency.
"Now!" Hayes roared. "All ships, focus fire on the wound. Don't let it heal."
The final phase of the battle was a race against time.
The Prometheus array, finally charged to full power, began creating artificial stars around the wound's perimeter. As each star went supernova, the explosions created shock waves in spacetime itself, preventing the gap from closing while simultaneously expanding it.
"Admiral," Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the comm system, "the array is working, but the expansion is creating a cascading effect."
"We're not just closing the wound, we're inverting it."
Hayes felt a grim smile cross his face.
"Explain." "We're turning it inside out. Instead of our reality leaking into the void is being forced into our reality.
But our reality has rules, physics, causality, entropy. The void can't exist here without changing." As they watched, the wound began to collapse in on itself.
The void spawn, caught in the cascading implosion, were pulled back into the gap between realities.
But as they disappeared, they screamed not with sound, but with psychic emanations that spoke of rage and, for the first time in eons, fear. The wound sealed itself with a flash of light that briefly outshone nearby galaxies.
When the radiation cleared, the void between galaxies was truly empty for the first time in millions of years.
But the victory came at a cost. Of the 200 ships that had entered the void, only 12 survived the return journey. The Retribution was among them, but barely. Half her crew was dead, her hull was held together by emergency patches, and her quantum disruptors had burned out from overuse. Admiral Hayes stood on his damaged bridge, looking out at the stars that seemed brighter somehow, as if the universe itself was celebrating the victory. "Status report," he requested wearily. "All remaining ships are accounted for, Admiral," Commander Park replied.
"The Kethmori are hailing us. They want to express their gratitude." Hayes nodded. "Put them through." Zarathal's image appeared on the main screen, but she looked different.
The exhaustion was gone, replaced by something that might have been hope. "Admiral Hayes," she said, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of wonder, "our deep space sensors are detecting something unprecedented. Across our galaxy, worlds that were consumed by the void spawn are returning. Not the physical matter, but the life force itself.
It's as if the universe is remembering what was lost."
Hayes felt a weight lift from his shoulders.
"And the threat? Gone. Completely."
"Our scientists believe that by inverting the wound, you didn't just close it, you cauterized it.
The void between realities can no longer bleed into our universe." "Good." Hayes turned to his crew. "Signal the fleet. We're going home."
But as the human ships began their long journey back to Earth, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they'd changed something fundamental about the universe. They'd proven that life, consciousness, and sheer bloody-minded determination could stand against the void itself and win. The universe had learned a new lesson that day: when faced with extinction, humans don't just fight, they fight dirty, they fight smart, and they fight with the kind of desperate creativity that comes from having nothing left to lose. The journey home took 8 months. When the surviving ships finally entered the Sol system, they found a hero's welcome waiting for them. Every major space station in the solar system had gathered to greet the returning warriors. The orbital platforms around Earth blazed with celebration fires, and the radio spectrum crackled with messages of gratitude from across human space. But for Admiral Hayes, the most important welcome came from a simple transmission from his daughter on Luna Base. "Dad," her voice crackled through the comm system, "you did it. You actually did it. The entire universe is talking about what humanity accomplished out there. They're calling us the Liberators." Hayes smiled for the first time in months. "We're not liberators, sweetheart. We're just humans. And when someone threatens our friends, we respond accordingly." The debriefing sessions that followed would continue for years. Every aspect of the mission was analyzed, every decision scrutinized, every innovation catalogued. The human military learned valuable lessons about fighting in non-standard spacetime, about adapting to impossible conditions, and about the importance of being willing to sacrifice everything for the greater good. But perhaps the most important lesson was one that the Kethmori taught them. "Your species," Zarathal had said during one of their final meetings, "approaches warfare not as a necessary evil, but as a problem to be solved. You don't just fight to win, you fight to ensure that the problem never arises again." That level of thoroughness is both terrifying and admirable. The technologies developed during the war revolutionized human civilization. Quantum disruptors became the foundation for faster-than-light travel that didn't require exotic matter. Kethmori reality stabilization matrices led to breakthroughs in physics that allowed humans to explore dimensions beyond the normal three. The Prometheus array technology eventually became the basis for controlled stellar engineering, allowing humanity to create custom stars for terraforming projects. But more importantly, the war established humanity's reputation in the galactic community. When the Kethmori shared the story of how humans had solved the void spawn problem, the response was universal, profound respect mixed with healthy fear. Other species began to approach humanity not as primitive newcomers to the galactic stage, but as the people you called when you had a problem that couldn't be solved through conventional means. Humans became known as the universe's troubleshooters, the species that would find a way to win even when victory seemed impossible. 5 years after the war, Hayes stood in his office at the newly established Galactic Defense Command, looking out at the bustling spaceport beyond. Ships from dozens of different species came and went, all part of the new alliance that had formed in the wake of the Void Spawn defeat. "Admiral," his aide announced, "you have a visitor." Hayes turned to see Zara Thal standing in his doorway, her form shimmering with what he'd learned was Kethmori amusement.
"Commander," he said warmly. "What brings you to Earth?"
"A problem," she replied, settling into the specially designed chair that accommodated her unique physiology.
"The Galactic Council has received a distress signal from the Magellan Clouds.
Something is consuming entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space behind."
Hayes felt a familiar chill. Void Spawn?
No, Zarathal's harmonics carried undertones of concern.
Something else. Something that our scientists believe may be even more dangerous. The consumed systems aren't just empty, they're actively hostile to life.
Ships that enter the affected regions simply stop. Not destroyed, not damaged, but frozen in time itself. Hayes leaned back in his chair, already beginning to formulate strategies.
And the Galactic Council wants humanity to investigate? They want humanity to solve it, Zarathal corrected.
As they put it, when the universe has a problem that defies all logic and threatens all life, you call the humans.
They'll find a way to kill it.
Hayes laughed, but it was a sound without humor.
They do realize that we're not actually invincible, right? That we lost thousands of good people in the void between galaxies? They know, Zarathal replied. But they also know that when faced with extinction, humans don't surrender. They adapt, they improvise, and they find ways to win that no one else would even consider. That's why the universe trusts you with problems like this.
Hayes stood up, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so distant.
How long do we have? The phenomenon is expanding at roughly 1 light-year per month.
At that rate, it will reach inhabited systems within 2 years.
Then we better get started. Hayes activated his comm system. This is Admiral Hayes to all department heads. We have a new mission.
Something in the Magellan Clouds is killing time itself, and we've been asked to stop it. I want full strategic analysis, threat assessment, and fleet composition recommendations on my desk within 72 hours.
As his staff rushed to comply, Hayes turned back to Zarathal.
You know, when your people first asked for our help, I thought we were just going to fight some oversized monsters.
I didn't realize we were signing up to become the universe's emergency response team. Zarathal's form shimmered with what might have been sympathy. Perhaps it's better that you didn't. If you had known what you were becoming, would you have answered our call? Hayes considered the question carefully.
Outside his window, he could see human ships preparing for departure, their crews already eager to face whatever new impossible challenge awaited them in the depths of space.
Yes, he said finally. Because that's what humans do. When someone needs help, we answer. Even if it means facing down the end of the universe itself. As Zarathal prepared to leave, she paused at the doorway. Admiral, may I ask you something? Why does your species seem so comfortable with impossible odds?
Most civilizations would have fled from the void spawn, or tried to negotiate, or simply accepted their fate.
But humans seem to thrive on challenges that should be insurmountable. Hayes smiled grimly. Because we learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about what should be possible. It only cares about what is possible. And what's possible is limited only by how far you're willing to go to make it happen.
3 days later, the deadliest armada in human history departed from Earth orbit. This time, they weren't fighting to save an alien species. They were fighting to save time itself. The ships that made up the new fleet were different from those that had battled the void spawn. These vessels incorporated lessons learned from the previous war, technologies that had been refined through years of study, and weapons that pushed the boundaries of what physics would allow. The flagship of the new fleet was the UES Prometheus, a vessel that existed partially outside normal spacetime.
Its hull was constructed from quantum crystallized matter that could phase in and out of reality at will. Its weapons included temporal disruptors that could age targets to dust in seconds, and causality bombs that could erase events from the timeline itself. But as Admiral Hayes stood on the Prometheus's bridge, watching the stars shift to the blue-white of faster-than-light travel, he knew that their most powerful weapon remained the same as it had always been: human ingenuity, determination, and the absolute refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Admiral Commander Park, now promoted to captain and serving as his second-in-command, reported from the navigation station, "We're approaching the edge of the affected zone. Long-range sensors are detecting unusual readings." Hayes nodded. On screen, the main display showed a region of space that seemed to flicker between existence and non-existence. Stars would appear for a moment, then vanish, then reappear in different locations. Ships floated motionless in the void, their crews presumably frozen in time. "It's beautiful," Dr. Chin observed from the science station. "And absolutely terrifying. Whatever's causing this is rewriting the fundamental laws of physics in real time." "Then we'll just have to rewrite them back," Hayes replied. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. We're about to enter a region where the normal rules don't apply. Remember your training, trust your instincts, and above all, remember that impossible is just another word for untried." As the human fleet crossed into the affected zone, reality began to shift around them. But they were ready. They had learned from their previous encounter with forces beyond normal understanding. They had adapted, evolved, and prepared for challenges that existed beyond the scope of traditional warfare. The universe was about to learn, once again, that when humanity was asked for help, they didn't just send soldiers or ships or weapons. They sent hope. They sent determination. They sent the kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried their species from the caves to the stars. And sometimes, in a universe full of impossible challenges and incomprehensible threats, that was exactly what was needed. The war for time itself was about to begin, and humanity was ready to teach the universe one more lesson about the consequences of threatening what they protected. After all, when aliens asked for help, humans didn't just send an armada. They sent the deadliest armada ever conceived, not because they were naturally violent, but because they understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And in a universe where the impossible was just another Tuesday, that made all the difference. As the human fleet prepared to engage whatever force was unraveling time itself in the Magellan Clouds, a new chapter in the story of humanity's role as the universe's defenders was about to begin. The species that had once been confined to a single blue planet had become the guardians of reality itself, one impossible battle at a time. The stars watched and waited, knowing that whatever came next, humanity would face it with the same determination, creativity, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to surrender that had already saved existence once before. In the depths of space, where time itself was under attack, the deadliest armada ever assembled prepared to prove once again that some problems could only be solved by the species that had learned to turn warfare into an art form. The universe had asked for help. Humanity had answered. And heaven help whatever stood in their way. The first indication that the Magellan Cloud phenomenon was unlike anything they'd faced before came 12 hours into their approach. The UES Prometheus, humanity's most advanced warship, simply stopped existing for 43 seconds. Report! Admiral Hayes barked as the bridge materialized around him, his officers looking around in confusion as if waking from a dream they couldn't quite remember. "Sir," Captain Park said, her voice shaky, "according to our chronometers, we've been gone for 43 seconds. But according to the fleet's sensors, we never left. We were here the entire time." Dr. Chen looked up from her instruments, her face pale. "Admiral, I'm detecting temporal displacement signatures throughout the ship. We didn't just stop, we were edited out of the timeline and then edited back in." Hayes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Edited by what? Before anyone could answer, the main display flickered to life, showing an image that made several bridge officers step backward in shock. It was a ship, or what had once been a ship. The vessel appeared to be constructed from crystallized time itself, its hull shifting between different moments of its existence. In one section, it was newly built and gleaming. In another, it was ancient and corroded.
In a third, it existed as nothing more than blueprints and good intentions. Unknown vessel, Hayes said, opening a communication channel. This is Admiral Hayes of the United Earth Alliance. Identify yourself. The response came not as words, but as a direct insertion of knowledge into their minds. Suddenly, every human on the bridge knew exactly what they were facing, and the knowledge was terrifying. The entity called itself the Chronarch, and it was the last surviving member of a species that had evolved beyond the need for physical form. They had become beings of pure temporal energy, existing across all moments of time simultaneously. But something had gone wrong. Their transcendence had become a curse, and they were now trapped in an endless loop of their own making, unable to die, unable to truly live. In their desperation, they had begun consuming time itself, hoping to find a way to break free from their eternal prison. Every star system they touched was drained of its temporal energy, leaving behind regions where causality itself ceased to function. We do not wish to harm you, the Chronarch's voice echoed in their minds, but we must feed. We must find a way to end our existence, or we will consume everything that ever was or ever will be. Hayes straightened in his command chair, his jaw set in determination. There has to be another way. We're here to help, not to destroy you. The Chronarch's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass across eternity. You cannot help us, young species. We have existed since the universe was young. We have seen civilizations rise and fall, stars born and die. We have tried everything to end our torment, and nothing has worked. You haven't tried working with humans, Hayes replied grimly. Dr. Chen, I need options. How do we kill something that exists across all of time? Dr. Chen's fingers flew across her instruments. Admiral, the Chronarch isn't lying about being trapped. I'm detecting massive temporal feedback loops throughout this region. It's like a knot in the fabric of time itself, and every time they try to break free, the knot gets tighter. So we untie the knot, Hayes said simply. Commander, signal the fleet. I want every ship equipped with temporal disruptors to form a perimeter around the Chronarch's vessel. We're going to try something that's either brilliant or suicidal. Sir, Captain Park said hesitantly, what exactly are we trying? Hayes smiled grimly. We're going to give them what they want. We're going to help them die. The next 6 hours were spent in frantic preparation. Human engineers worked alongside Kethmori scientists to modify the fleet's temporal weapons. Instead of using them to age targets or slow down time, they were going to attempt something that had never been tried before, creating a temporal nullity zone. The theory was simple, if utterly insane. By generating overlapping fields of temporal disruption, they could create a region where time didn't flow forward or backward, but simply stopped. Not the kind of stop that the Chronarch had inflicted on the frozen ships, but a complete cessation of temporal flow. It's like performing surgery on the universe itself, Dr. Chen explained during the final briefing. If we succeed, we'll create a bubble of non-time that should allow the Chronarch to finally escape their temporal prison. If we fail, we tear a hole in causality that could unravel the entire timeline, Hayes finished. I understand the risks, Doctor. But sometimes you have to roll the dice. The attack began at 1,347 hours ship time. Every human vessel in the fleet opened fire simultaneously, their temporal disruptors creating a web of chronological interference around the Chronarch's ship. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, reality began to fray at the edges. Space-time itself became visible as a shimmering fabric that rippled and warped under the assault. Stars aged backwards, then forwards, then sideways in directions that didn't exist. The Chronarch's ship began to phase in and out of existence, its crystalline hull cracking under the strain of temporal forces that were trying to tear it apart. Admiral! Captain Park shouted over the rising chaos. The temporal fields are destabilizing. We're losing coherence across the entire fleet. Hayes watched as one of the destroyers began to exist in multiple time periods simultaneously, its hull flickering between past, present, and future versions of itself. Hold position. We're almost there. The Chronarch's mental voice cut through the chaos, filled with something that might have been hope. It's working. We can feel the loop beginning to break. But the strain, we cannot maintain coherence much longer.
That was when Hayes made a decision that would be studied in military academies for generations to come.
Instead of trying to maintain the temporal fields from a safe distance, he ordered the Prometheus to move directly into the nullity zone.
"Admiral, that's suicide," Dr. Chun protested. "We don't know what will happen to biological matter in a temporal void."
"Then we'll find out," Hayes replied calmly.
"All hands, prepare for temporal displacement. We're going in."
The Prometheus entered the nullity zone like a ship sailing into a storm made of crystallized time.
The hull began to age and renew itself in rapid cycles.
Crew members experienced moments of their past and future simultaneously. The ship's computer systems began reporting impossible readings as they tried to process data from multiple timelines at once.
But it worked.
The Chronarchus ship, now free from the temporal loop that had trapped it for eons, began to collapse in on itself. But instead of destruction, what followed was transformation. The crystalline hull reformed into something that looked almost organic, a cocoon of hardened time that pulsed with its own internal rhythm.
"They're metamorphosing," Dr. Chen whispered in amazement. "The Chronarch isn't dying, they're being reborn."
The cocoon cracked open, and what emerged was beautiful beyond description. The Chronarch's new form was composed of living light that seemed to exist in harmony with the flow of time rather than fighting against it. Their mental voice, when it came, was filled with peace for the first time in millennia. "You have given us the greatest gift possible," the Chronarch said. "Not death, but transformation. We are no longer trapped by time, we are part of it. And as part of it, we can undo the damage we have caused." The transformation that followed was visible across half the galaxy. The regions of space that had been drained of temporal energy began to heal. The frozen ships came back to life, their crews unaware that they had been trapped in temporal stasis. Star systems that had been consumed by the Chronarch's hunger reappeared, their inhabitants having never known they had been erased from existence. But the most remarkable change was in the Chronarch themselves. Instead of consuming time, they now tended it, becoming gardeners of causality itself. They began to repair damaged timelines, prevent temporal paradoxes, and maintain the stability of the universe's chronological infrastructure. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid," the Chronarch said as the human fleet prepared to depart. "You have shown us that even the most impossible problems can be solved with enough determination and creativity." Hayes nodded respectfully. "Just remember us if the universe ever needs help again." Humanity seems to have developed a reputation for solving impossible problems. The journey back to Earth was quieter than their departure. The crew of the Prometheus had experienced something that changed them on a fundamental level. They had walked through a temporal void and emerged not just alive, but transformed. They had seen the birth of a new kind of being, one that would help protect the universe from the kinds of threats that existed beyond normal comprehension. As they approached the Sol system, Hayes stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed distant or cold. They seemed alive, protected by beings like the Chronarch who had learned to work with the fundamental forces of existence rather than against them. "Admiral," Captain Park said, approaching with a data pad, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth." "It's from the Galactic Council." Hayes sighed. "Let me guess. They have another impossible problem that needs solving." Park's expression was grim. "Multiple problems, sir. Reports are coming in from across the galaxy. Something is causing entire civilizations to lose their ability to dream. Without dreams, species are losing their capacity for imagination, innovation, and hope. They're becoming static." Hayes felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. "And they want humanity to investigate?" "They want humanity to lead a joint task force to find and stop whatever's stealing dreams from the galaxy," Park corrected. "The message specifically requests that we bring our unique approach to problem solving." Hayes laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "Our unique approach to problem solving. They make it sound like we're some kind of cosmic repair service." "Aren't we?" Dr. Chen asked from the science station. "We've fought beings that consumed worlds, creatures that existed outside reality, and entities that fed on time itself. We become the species that others call when the universe breaks down." Hayes considered this. Outside the viewports,
He could see the blue-white glow of Earth growing larger as they approached home.
Soon, they would be back to debriefings, analysis, and preparation for the next impossible mission. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, he said finally. Someone has to stand guard against the threats that exist beyond normal understanding. Someone has to be ready to face the impossible with nothing but determination and human ingenuity. And if we keep succeeding? Captain Park asked. Hayes smiled grimly. Then we keep the universe a little bit safer for everyone who calls it home. And if we fail? We won't fail, Dr. Chen said firmly.
We can't afford to. Too many people are counting on us.
As the human fleet entered Earth orbit, Admiral Hayes looked out at the stars one more time.
Somewhere out there, entire civilizations were losing their ability to dream.
Somewhere beyond that, other threats were probably stirring, waiting for their chance to unmake everything that humanity and their allies had worked to protect.
But humanity was ready.
They had learned to fight beings that existed outside reality, to heal wounds in time itself, and to solve problems that defied every known law of physics. They had become the universe's emergency response team, the species that others called when the impossible became inevitable. And as the deadliest armada ever assembled prepared for its next mission, Admiral Hayes knew that no matter what challenges awaited them in the vast darkness between stars, humanity would face them with the same determination, creativity, and absolute refusal to surrender that had already saved existence twice. The universe was vast and full of wonders and terrors beyond imagination. But it was also protected by a species that had learned to turn warfare into an art form, diplomacy into a science, and hope into a weapon more powerful than any technology. Humanity had answered the call when aliens asked for help. And they would keep answering, one impossible challenge at a time, until the universe was safe for all who called it home. After all, someone had to stand guard against the dark. And humanity had decided long ago that they were more than willing to be that someone.